Hi students, this is a real quick introduction to sensation and perception. So lesson 1, this is our 6th unit. We're going to discuss sensory transduction and the process of threshold and adaptation in this lesson. Before we begin on that, we will discuss the differences between sensation and perception. Sensation is the stimulation of sensory receptors and transmission of sensory information to the central nervous system. You can see your brain lighting up there. Your brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system, sends peripheral messages throughout the peripheral nervous system using our sensory information. So sensory information, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, is what we're talking about. I'm going to show you the difference between sensation and perception on my next few clicks. I want you to read the statement I show you from right to left and see if you can make sense of it. All right, if you saw the cat saw the rat, well, you might have been mistaken. Let's see it again. Don't try to figure it out, just read it real quick. And I'll click on it one more time and just let you marinate on it. This is the difference between sensation and perception. Your sensory information is the visual inputs, and then your perception is what you actually translate. So I saw the cat saw the rat, but it's not what it says. It says the cat was the tar, if you take notice of that. But perception is what allows me to make sense of this information. See if you can make sense of this. If you're able to make sense of this, again, it is because of perception. Your brain is able to organize these letters into something meaningful for us because it's freaking amazing. All right, so some basics behind sensation and perception. Perception is the psychological process by which we interpret sensory information. So this is the meaning that we give to that which we see, hear, taste, smell, touch, all of that. It's a pretty amazing process, and I'll share, of course, more with you about this in class. We organize information using thresholds. Thresholds are like the baseline, all right? So an absolute threshold is the weakest amount of stimulus that can be sensed, the weakest stimulus information. So for taste, it is 1 teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water. Now that can differ between individuals and other organisms, but the minimum amount of sugar in 2 gallons of water is 1 teaspoon that we would be able to detect, the threshold. That's the threshold. On a dark, clear night, we can see a candle flame at 30 miles away. Half of the time, this is, I should also say, 50% of the time. We can smell 1 drop of perfume diffused into an entire volume of 3-room apartment. And there's others. For touch, it's a bee's wing on our cheek from a centimeter away. So our absolute threshold, I mean, they're there to help keep us safe and alive, just like some other things we've talked about. Another threshold is the difference, the minimum amount of difference that can be distinguished between 2 stimuli. And we do this with vision, we do this with hearing, we do it with all kinds of different stimuli, of course. And here I'm going to click and show you some squares and some boxes and see if you can determine the difference threshold. Where do you see the difference between these colors? Now for me, it's not until about the 4th box where I notice that these things are different colors. So the difference threshold may be different for you. It's different. Other things that we're attuned to with perception is the signal detection theory, which tells us that we are more attuned to distinguish between sensory stimuli that takes account the setting, the physical state, the mood, and expectation. So if you remember that context-dependent stuff, that's what we're talking about with signal detection. A newborn baby's parents are going to be more attuned to hear and listen for a newborn baby's cry, more than I would. So they're going to recognize their child's cry when there might be a bunch of other louder noises going on. Think of it like when you're walking through the cafeteria and you hear someone say your name. You are into that signal. Another thing is how we adapt to our environment. If you remember visual encoding and auditory encoding, these things go away. Our sensory memory is very rapid. Well, so is our detection of senses. Here our pupils are getting larger when we flip on a light. So this is where, let's see, process by which becoming more sensitive to weak stimuli and less sensitive to unchanging stimuli. So dark room, you flip on the light, you gradually get used to that light. A sensory adaptation is true for when you step into a smelly room and you gradually don't smell the smelly room anymore. The same might be like if you go into a teacher's classroom and they have like a plug-in or something. You smell it initially, but it gradually weakens over time. You jump into a cold pool in the summertime, and before long it's not so cold. This is sensory adaptation. We go through sensory adaptation all throughout the day, many different ways. So there's that. All right, that's really brief information when it comes to sensory transduction. Transduction is just making sense of the sensory world and basic concepts of threshold and adaptation.